The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October installment of our VSA webinar series, which comes to you from the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts and addresses topics related to the arts and special education. I am Jenna Gabriel, Manager of Special Education here at the Center, and I am your webinar moderator. Today's webinar is called The Teacher and the Teaching Artist, Collaboration and Community Building in the Classroom. If you would like to view a live stream captioning of this webinar, you can follow the link you see on the slide and in the chat box of the control panel located to the right side of your screen. Before we get started, let's touch base on the GoToWebinar control panel. This control panel can be hidden by clicking on the orange arrow in the top left corner. If you need to leave the webinar early, you can leave by clicking on the X in the upper right corner. A recording of the webinar will be available afterwards, so you can catch up on any parts you miss. You can connect to the audio portion of the webinar through your telephone or through your computer's microphone and speakers. Select the option that works best for you. If you are calling in from your telephone, please make sure you mute your computer speakers. You can submit comments, questions, or answers to questions using the chat panel located near the bottom of the control panel. I will monitor it throughout the webinar. If you prefer to speak your input rather than typing it, please click on the Raise Your Hand icon on the control panel, and I will touch base with you and unmute your microphone at the appropriate time. You will have a few opportunities to participate during the webinar. There will be polls during the webinar, which you will be prompted to respond to on your screen. We will also have the opportunity for questions once Nancy and Chad's presentation has concluded. During the open-ended question and answer time, please click on the Raise Your Hand icon if you wish to speak, or type your thoughts into the chat pane. Within the week, we will send out a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's presentation, a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, the presentation handouts, and a copy of the webinar transcript. This means that you can go back to watch the recording and review supplemental materials in addition to any notes you take during the webinar itself. Next month launches an exciting new webinar format that we will offer periodically throughout our webinar season, a month-long series of weekly lightning talks around important issues of interest to our field. This format, called Voices from the Field, will offer viewers the opportunity to hear from the perspective of 4 experts in our community and will include a brief time for questions. November's topic is Teaching Students with Autism, What Teaching Theater Teaches Us, and will include lightning talks from 3 practitioners and researchers using theater practices in social skills interventions for young people with autism. In the final talk, we will explore how these findings can impact classroom practice in both arts and academic settings. These talks will take place on Tuesdays throughout November, except Thanksgiving week, at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you haven't already, you can register for the series now by following the link on this slide. If you are active in social media, I encourage you to connect with us using hashtag VSAWebinar. On Facebook, we are VSA International. And on Twitter, we are VSAINTL. We would love to engage with you. And with that, I will turn it over to today's presenters. Chad and Nancy, take it away.
All right, thank you, Jenna. Let's just get this started. All right, I think we're good to go. All right, so welcome everyone. Welcome teaching artists, teachers, administrators, and anyone else who is tuning in to today's webinar. We're beaming to you directly from Brooklyn, New York, and we are here today to share with you the 6 characteristics of a successful collaboration between the teaching artist and the classroom teacher. Before we get this webinar underway, we would like to introduce ourselves as your presenters, as well as get an idea of the background of everyone participating in today's webinar.
Okay, I am Nancy Gallant. I am a teaching artist in New York City. I'm also a professional development specialist. My disciplines are dance, theater, and writing. My specialty, of course, is in this webinar too, is special education, middle school, and inclusion.
Hi, and I am Chad Hamilton. I've been a special education teacher for the last 11 years here in Brooklyn. I am part of District 75, which I may have to take a minute to explain, as that may be an entity that is new to many people tuning in today. District 75 is very unique in that it is a very large citywide special education district here within New York City. It's comprised of over 50 school organizations located at over 300 sites throughout all 5 boroughs. So that, of course, includes the Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and Staten Island. D75 is comprised of self-contained special education classrooms, oftentimes co-located within general education schools. The students that we serve are, they include students with autism, intellectual disability, emotional behavioral disorders, hearing or vision impairments, as well as students with multiple handicaps. Sometimes you'll probably hear me referring to 12 to 1 to 1 or 6 to 1 to 1 classrooms. Whenever I refer to those types of classrooms, I'm referring to the classroom ratio. So when I say 12 to 1 to 1, I mean 12 students with 1 teacher and a minimum of 1 classroom paraprofessional. And if I make mention of a 6 to 1 to 1 classroom, I am speaking of a classroom with 6 students, 1 teacher, and 1 paraprofessional. Nancy and I have been fortunate to work together for several years. I think I first had her in my classroom, wow, like maybe 6 or
I think it was, Chad, yeah.
7 years ago.
Yeah.
And we've collaborated several times throughout the years. And today we will be sharing with you some of the strategies that we have developed in our collaborations. But before we get into that, we wanted to know the background of everyone participating in today's webinar.
So what is your professional background? Teaching artist? Classroom teacher? Administrator? Education director?
This is just to give us an idea of who we are speaking to today. And I have no idea what this means.
I'll unmute myself for just 1 second to let everyone know we'll give you about 30 seconds more-ish to respond. Then I'll share. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share out the results and then chime in that we did have a couple people let me know over the questions panel that they are outliers in this, but no less valuable to our community. We have a speech and language pathologist as well as some parents joining us.
Oh, that's great.
That's wonderful.
All right, and Nancy and Chad, do you want me to launch the next one as well?
Please.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Yep.
So our next question is, how many years have you worked in a special education setting? 1 year? 2 years? 3 years? 5 years? Or, like Nancy and I, 7 years or more?
And again, we'll give you another 15, 20 seconds or so. All right, and those polls are up.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Jenna.
Thank you.
So we're having a moment of technical difficulty in that we cannot see the results of the polls.
Oh, all right. I'm going to go ahead then and narrate. So for your professional background, you had a really nice mix. About 40% of you identified as teaching artists, 9% as classroom teachers, 31% as administrators, and 18% as education directors. Again, recognizing that we've got a couple of folks who are representing our related service providers and our families. And relative to years, you've got, again, a really nice spread. About 10% who are early career professionals with 1 year of experience and about the same amount with 5 years of experience. About 24% have in the 2 to 3 year range, and about half of your participants have been working in special ed for 7 or more years.
Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. So we really do have a pretty broad range of backgrounds and years of experience. That's exciting to have such a great mix with us today.
So we wanted to, I want to just go over the takeaways today from the webinar. So one is 6 characteristics defined of a collaboration and a relationship with teaching artists and classroom teachers and service providers in the classroom. How to build and sustain the 6 characteristics. Outcomes when the 6 characteristics are present. 6 characteristics of the successful collaboration, and the first one and very important one is trust. Seeking input from one another and allowing one another to do their jobs without necessary oversight. And I think here one of the biggest characteristics that fits into that definition is listening. So it's really at this point about actively listening to each other and really hearing where each other are coming from in their teaching practices, in their classroom culture, in the school culture, and really listening to how their students are learning, what the needs of the students are, and a lot of the behavioral strategies that might have to take place in order to keep this whole thing going.
And I, just to chime in, as a classroom teacher, I know that trust is something that many teachers may have to struggle with, especially when someone new is coming into the classroom. This idea of doing our jobs without unnecessary oversight is, I think, a primary concern of most teachers. So oftentimes when a teacher is meeting the teaching artist for the first time, there are concerns of trust and who is this person in my classroom? What is their role here? What are they doing? What are they looking for? What are they seeing?
You know, and the thing is, I just want to add, Chad, is, and you'll probably hear me say this a lot, you know, and I'm going to direct this towards the teaching artist for a moment. You know, we come in as the outsiders, and we want to help build a community with the residency or the project that we're doing for this particular school. So as an outsider coming in, it's very important to listen and to look and to really have your observation skills, you know, really at the forefront, you know.
That's a very good point. Thanks, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Moving on to number 2, the second characteristic is diversity. So when we're speaking about diversity, of course, in New York City and in many cities throughout the country, we're going to have diversity in student populations. But when we're talking about diversity today, we're really speaking to difference in thinking and difference in opinions. In our definition, we would say that diversity expands the number of potential outcomes, expands the number of potential solutions, and enables everyone in the collaboration to learn from one another.
You know, and I think of that as that diversity is about light bulbs going off.
Right.
as you're both talking, the teaching artist and the teacher and paraprofessionals even, service providers, everybody's talking, everybody's, having their light bulbs go off, and you really have to make space and room for that. So with that said, mindfulness. In a mindful collaboration, people are open to new ideas, encouraging everyone to have a voice and express his or her ideas without ridicule or criticism. That is again about listening, taking in, even if, and we've all been through this before, somebody will say something and it doesn't really maybe resonate with how your teaching practice is or how you communicate. But if you take a moment, and I'm going to say it because it's mindfulness, if you take a moment, take a breath, and take that in for a moment and digest, there's where conversations take place. There's where ideas, and that's where a place where everybody has a voice in order to express his or her ideas.
Next is interrelatedness, which we define as understanding and being understanding and sensitive to the goal at hand, and also being aware of how your work can affect the work of the teaching artist, and vice versa, how the teaching artist's work can affect that of not just the classroom teacher, but also any paraprofessionals in the room, any related service providers such as speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, any of those professions that may be pushing into the during one of these teaching artist class periods, one of these enrichment art-based opportunities. Again, this all comes back to what we spoke about earlier about trust. Is that I feel that at first when the teacher is meeting the teaching artist, they're still trying to feel each other out, trying to determine what is going to be the most effective way for us to collaborate in the classroom, and what is going to be the most effective way for us to present our students with new and different learning opportunities.
I just want to say one thing, Chad, that you made me think, the goal at hand. Even though there's a goal that both the teaching and the teaching artist have that they want to accomplish, I think it's really important, and for the teaching artist and the classroom teacher, to talk about the process. So we really can't get to the goal unless we're really deeply invested in the process of what we're doing.
Thanks, Nancy.
Welcome. Respect. Interactions that are considerate, honest, and authentic. Being willing to change and shift in the midst of conflict and problem solve with tactfulness. Well, I think that we all know what that's all about, and I think that we've all been in situations where, the population that we work with, things can shift very quickly, and we need together to think on our feet and to be considerate. Sometimes the teaching artists, if things maybe aren't going as smoothly as possible, then we need to pull back, and you need to let the classroom teacher get his or her classroom under control. Do you agree with that, Chip?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that the classroom teacher, I think, is always very concerned about is maintaining a certain level of order, maintaining the protocols and routines that are already in place in the classroom. And even when the teaching artist is present, I think the teacher is always trying to keep an eye on things and trying to make sure that everything continues to run smoothly.
I just want to say one thing, because I think I've done this with you, Chad, and probably, I'm sure I know, with other teachers. Sometimes when maybe a teaching artist has an idea and wants to see if they can maybe take something in a different direction, I know that at first I really always turn to the classroom teacher and just maybe, I'm curious. I'm curious, do you think that we might be able to do this if we somehow, can work together just to create it? I mean, it's good to create a shift in a class and some kind of change. It's not only good for the teaching artist and the classroom teacher and whoever else is in the room, so good for the students, because really that's why we're there. Very good for the students as well.
And of course, a big part of respect is going to be effective communication. When you're communicating with each other effectively, you're really going to be communicating through multiple channels. One of these channels that we identify is what we call a rich channel of communication. That can include face-to-face interaction. It can also include telephone conversations. Another channel of effective communication would be what we refer to as a lean channel of communication. That can include emails, text messages, communicating through Facebook, or if you're of my age, instant messenger, if that even still exists. I have no idea. And that's one thing that you always have to take into consideration is what are the preferences of the classroom teacher when communicating. Some teachers may prefer that face-to-face, in-the-moment communication with the teaching artist, whereas others may be they may want some time to themselves to reflect upon what happened during that period with the teaching artist, and then communicate via email or through Facebook or text messages. Most likely email, though.
I think so. I think it's most likely email. You know, we're all busy, and it's hard, hard to do telephone conversations. Face-to-face is always great, and of course, we'll talk about this later. Face-to-face is nice if you have a planning meeting that you can, talk with the teacher first. You can talk with the teaching artist first, but the communication is so important to really keep that as clear as you can and as mindful as you can.
Absolutely. So now we're moving on to a question that we have that Nancy and I will start to answer. How do we build and sustain these characteristics and traits of each professional in the collaboration and work relationship?
The first one, professionalism. The teaching artist enters the classroom essentially, as I said before, as an outsider. So you're coming in as an outsider. So those first two visits, as we know, we have a lot of teaching artists on this webinar. The first two visits are really about observing and really taking notes if you can. If there's a possibility of talking to the kids and just really understanding what the inner workings of that classroom is. And it really starts when you walk in the door. You walk in the door, you see the security guards, then you see the administrators and what the culture of the classroom is. Observing the way students and teachers work together, as well as examining the contributions, very important. I'm going to say that again. As well as examining the contributions of the paraprofessionals and related service providers. I know for myself, and for Chad too, when you go into a classroom, there can be a lot of people in the classroom working with special ed and inclusion. And so that's a real, as I always have said for years, that's a big dance to partake in. So examining, observing.
Absolutely, and I do think it's very important to rely on paraprofessionals as sources of information. They typically spend more time with the students than anyone else in the school, even more time with the students than the actual classroom teacher. And I do feel that oftentimes paraprofessionals and their expertise, it's often overlooked. And I do feel that when the teaching artist opens up that line of communication with the paraprofessional, it can really inform their practice that much more.
And it gives everybody a space to know that they're important in the classroom, because everybody's there to do a specific job. And when you can start weaving those jobs in a way that helps the kids to take risks, take chances in learning, then the whole process is working well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, as for the teacher's part in this, in terms of professionalism. Obviously, the teacher is always going to be working to maintain the culture of the classroom, maintain classroom expectations, such as the structure of the day, the structure of where kids are situated within the classroom, also ensuring student safety. But that said, the teacher should also be open to whatever creative project is being introduced by the teaching artist. We want the teacher to be willing to give up some of that control that they have over their classroom and to share their space with the teaching artist. Of course, there will be conflict. That's inevitable. We're all human, but if we're being professional, then we're looking at conflict as a way for us to learn from each other and to learn from experience and to go deeper into the learning process. And in terms of addressing the conflict, we definitely want to be communicating with each other, not taking things personally. We really want to be moving forward in the relationship and continuing the collaboration even when it is difficult. And this is really a time when planning meetings with the teaching artist and the classroom teacher are essential.
I love planning meetings, and sometimes, you know, in our residencies and projects that we do when teaching artists go into a school, I think it's happening more and more that planning meetings are being integrated into the whole process of the residency. That's important. That's really where the foundation begins, are those planning meetings. It's where you get to know each other as, you know, not just teachers and not just, you know, classroom teachers, but as people. You know, asking small, you know, having small talk, and that's where, you know, there is going to be conflict. There's always conflict, and I take conflict as a way to, like Chad said, to go deeper into the learning process, to learn, and it's hard. It's something that one has to be conscious of and learn. You know, just as we learn how to have a successful collaboration, there's also room for learning about a collaboration that has conflict, because there's conflict there because there's passion. That's what I feel sometimes,
right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, Chad? There's passion about what we do. Yeah.
Right, yeah, very much so. There's a very deep investment in what we're all doing, especially I feel in special education, when the needs of our students are oftentimes so much more pronounced. Yeah, conflict is inevitable. But moving along into our next area is pedagogy. This is one of the characteristics that we would want to certainly have in place in our successful working relationship. So obviously, when we're talking about pedagogy in terms of the teacher, we're talking, I think, about the teacher's relatively deep understanding of the personality and the learning characteristics of each child in the classroom. Even if it's a teacher who is new to that group of students for that school year, usually within, my feeling is usually within 1 to 2 months of working with those kids, the teacher has a relatively good idea of what is going to be the most successful way of reaching those students. The teacher will also have developed some understanding of what teaching strategies and what methodologies have proven to be most effective for each student in the classroom.
As far as the teaching artist goes, with that, you know, the teaching artist is also bringing their toolbox into the classroom with their own strategies that they've learned how to work with, you know, the different learning styles that they look at as far as theater goes, as far as dance goes. Are a lot of the kids kinesthetic? Are most of the kids visual, auditory, you know, or are they more vocal? Or how can you take 3 of those things and place them in the art form that you're going to be teaching? So you need to understand how in the art your art can enhance those learning styles. So that's knowing how to break your art form down into the tiniest little basic form so you can integrate and find entry points, you know, Chad, of really learning and accelerating, hopefully, the outcome of students.
And of course, a big part of that is going to be moving into collaboration, which we've already touched upon quite a bit. But if you're collaborating effectively, then you're maintaining that open dialogue. That dialogue between the teacher and the teaching artist is it's really essential so that we can share what students have been learning across curricula. The teacher should really be informing the teaching artist, well, this is what we've been doing this month in ELA. This is what we've been working on in math. This is what we've been doing this week. This is what we're doing today. I think by making the teaching artist very aware of what goes on in the day-to-day running of the classroom, you're really then presenting the teaching artist with multiple entry points to reach the students and to help further the students' learning. And another very important piece to this is that the teacher should also be sharing what the students will be learning about in the future, as well as any current challenges, any areas of strength that the students are experiencing. And also, I think, presenting the teaching artist with some areas of where the teacher has had difficulty so that the teaching artist can really be there in a support role and help the classroom teacher troubleshoot some possible solutions to these problems. Hopefully, in so doing this, the teacher will start to view the teaching artist as someone who's really there to enhance student learning.
So this is where the collaboration for me gets very rich and very deep, because you're not so much walking parallel with each other anymore, but now you've really got to weave together to be able to, like for instance, the teaching artist might have an idea, and now that she's been in the class here, she's been in the class for a little bit, you know, that idea is going to morph and maybe it's going to change. So you have to, and I know that you all know this, to be so adept at your craft that you can integrate that art form on, and I said this before, and I think it's okay to say it again because I think it's really important to integrate your art form on the most basic level, that you can unpack your art form in order for the kids to start to explore, to start to be curious, and also to blend in with what the teacher is trying to learn, to teach, and give to her students as well. So you're looking at you're looking and hearing and feeling and describing all those things, and you are finding the essence of what the teacher is trying to teach. And then you're trying to take that essence and work it into your art form. And I'm not saying that this is 100%, but, you know, it's worked for me in the past, and sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it goes towards the classroom teacher, Chad, right? That you might need to know your English lesson so well that you can say, oh, I know where dance can fit into that,
right.
You know?
Right, exactly, and that's certainly something that I've experienced so many times, especially when watching Nancy work with my students. Even if I don't necessarily have something to bring in that moment during that creative project that we're working on, I'll oftentimes see the teaching artist do something that I can use later on in the day or later in the week, or as part of an ELA unit or part of my math unit, and that I feel has been definitely something that has improved my own effectiveness as a teacher. Now we actually have a question that we're going to present to our audience. So the question that we have is, do any of you have any suggestions how to move through conflict within a collaboration?
So I'm going to chime in really quickly here. This is a unique opportunity in our webinars to attempt to mimic that classroom and in-person professional development environment. And so Chad and Nancy are inviting your hands to be raised, or if you'd like to put things in through the question or chat panel, I'm happy to narrate them. But we're going to try our best to facilitate a little bit of a dialogue over this. All right, so Maya, I see your hand is up. I'm going to unmute your microphone. And you are good.
Hi, how is everyone? In kind of pondering this question about moving through conflict within a collaboration, there are a couple of things that come to mind for me that have been really helpful in the past. And that is first trying to have a dialogue with just the participants in the collaboration. So in this case, just the teaching artist and classroom teacher. It should be initiated by one of those parties, and to have it be a dialogue that is approached from a, listen, I just want to hear what your thoughts are about what's happening in the classroom, because I find that often conflict comes up when people are not communicating. So giving the opportunity for that communication to happen and being very open and honest through that. Which for some people can always be a challenge. I think it's something that everyone is constantly working on improving for themselves. And if that first step doesn't prove effective because one of the parties is perhaps a little resistant to moving through the conflict, kind of reaching out to the next person that can help mediate, whether that's an administrator at your arts partner or the AP or arts liaison at the school, to sort of help all of the goals that each party has for the residency or collaboration to come to fruition.
Right. I'm sorry, was your name Maya?
Yes, hi.
Well, hi, Maya. Thank you so much for that, and it's all it's really, you've said everything that we've been saying, and really the webinar really is about going deeper, working together to remember all those aspects of communication, because really collaboration is about communication. So it's remembering all those different aspects and just being very mindful and noticing where to impart the communication or maybe not. And when there is conflict, it's hard to say, oh, it's a gift, but it's a place of pause, if you will. A conflict could be a place of pause. So, but thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do feel that Maya brings up a good point also, that if at all possible, to have that initial meeting take place before we have the students present, to have that initial meeting with the professionals that will be involved in this creative endeavor. Oftentimes, if you're all thrown together, meeting each other for the first time with all the kids in the room, that can certainly make introductions and immediate communication very, very complicated, to say the least.
Great. Again, thank you, Maya, for chiming in. That was great.
Yeah,
thanks for sharing. So I think
we do also.
Will,
oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
We do have a couple that I just wanted to share with you that came through the chat pane. People said to ask questions like, how would you do it? And then to use active listening and reflecting on the goals of the partnership. Someone also shared that they feel that taking an attitude where you don't have ground or territory to protect could produce some roadblocks, and to be proactive during planning.
That's great. That's all. That's really beautiful. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are moving on to flexibility. Obviously, flexibility is a trait that every classroom teacher must possess. But I think in special education, it can be sometimes a little bit more difficult just because working with student populations within a special education setting, we're oftentimes very, very much adhering to routines and protocols that we have put in place for our students. So when working with the teaching artist, the classroom teacher really has to have an interest and a willingness to be open to incorporating the creative and expressive methodologies that are presented by the teaching artist. Also, the classroom teacher has to be more willing to allow the classroom culture and the classroom expectations to become more elastic. And also the classroom teacher has to really cultivate a curiosity about what else he or she could learn about students with the help of the teaching artist and really of the teaching artist's pedagogy and methodologies.
I think the flexibility of the teaching artist comes in, you know, you come in with a project in mind, and you know, just being really open to how the students, your students in special ed, how they can accomplish that. So be willing to be flexible in many different ways, and not getting too attached to the vision and the final outcome.
Our fifth characteristic or trait is creativity, obviously. In terms of how creativity manifests in the teacher, really the teacher should be aware to take concepts and principles that are presented by the teaching artist and be confident enough to put his or her own spin on these concepts to engage the students. Ultimately, a collaboration is not going to be that effective if the teaching artist comes in, spends one period a week, maybe at best 5 periods a week, presenting students with this creative project, but then when the teaching artist leaves, the teacher does nothing with that. That to me is it's a waste of resources. And really what the teacher should be trying to do is to try to determine, well, what aspects of this teaching artist methodology can I incorporate into my own practice? How can I use this when I'm teaching an ELA lesson or a math lesson or a social studies lesson? How can I use the teaching artist's expertise to expand my own practice?
So I think that the mindset of the teaching artist, and everybody does this in their own way because we're all creative human beings, but gently instilling the belief that creativity will only enhance and move things forward for learning, communication, and socialization in the classroom as a whole experience. So thinking of creativity not as and it can be, it goes both ways. Is it an art project, or is it about communication, or is it about socialization? What is it that the class needs? What is it that you are bringing to the table? And just knowing that creativity is bigger than just our disciplines. Trust. We go back to trust again, and I think that you know, building a community is all about trust and active listening and communication, kind of all the things that we've talked about, you know, including everybody. So it's very inclusive when there's a collaboration, when you're building community. When somebody doesn't feel included, it's nice to stop and to talk if you have that amount of time. But it's really a being included, that sense of everybody matters, everybody's voice is present.
Right, and I think this is something I mentioned earlier, which is that trust can be something that's difficult for classroom teachers. I feel especially so for special education teachers. I feel that we are by and large very, very protective of our students and even protective of the protocols and routines that we have in place that we oftentimes believe are the most beneficial way to be reaching our students. So yeah, trust is definitely something that we struggle with.
Yeah, and it's a big one, and I think sometimes for me, and something that I pull out of my toolbox is small talk. You know, before I go in and start like wanting to teach and rearrange and do all this, you know, small talk. How are you? You know, and you'll you know, I mean, you know that. I know most teaching artists know that. You know, how you doing? With the kids, sometimes I'll ask them, what did you have for breakfast? You know, a handshake. The smallest things that build community builds trust.
Yeah, it's a good way to show that you're invested in the school community, even though you may be relatively new to that space. Just by communicating with people and relating to them on a very day-to-day human level shows that you have a genuine interest in being there. I do feel that that makes a really big difference. And also, I feel that another thing that the teacher really needs to do is, when working with the teaching artist, is be willing to follow some of the suggestions that the teaching artist presents, even when the function or the significance of what the teaching artist is suggesting is not readily apparent. I think the teacher needs to be more willing to just go with it and to trust in the expertise of the teaching artist.
Well, yeah, I got to say that. Thank you, Chad. And you know, for us teaching, it goes both ways too. You know, it really is a 50-50 partnership. You know what I mean? And it's all about learning from each other. And when you're learning from each other, just to wrap this up, when you're really learning from each other and, like Chad said, invested. And this will lead into our next topic. You're going to see the kids blossom. You're going to see the kids start to have some aha moments, even through conflict.
Right, absolutely. And you know, this brings us to our final trait or characteristic, which is something like this one I always view as an easy one, because I feel this is something that is so apparent in so many of the people that I work with, whether it's teaching artists, paraprofessionals, related service providers. And it's this idea of altruism, that there's a real commonality between us in what we're doing when we're working with the students, and that we're all there to make a difference and to do the best that we can for our students. And I feel that when the teaching artist comes into the classroom, it's really to create a change or a shift, to make everyone feel comfortable, to make people feel supported and safe, so that they feel free to express themselves and to be creative. You know, also I feel that when we come into the classroom, we ideally are coming in with the best version of ourselves, so that we can inspire not only the students, but so that we can inspire each other to really do the best that we can do for the kids that we're working with.
You know, Chad, I liked what Chad said about changing and shifting, and you know, the reason why you have a outsider come into your classroom is to create some kind of change, some kind of shift, and that's not always easy for the kids that we're teaching in special ed. You know, that's a real risk, and an area where if the collaboration is solid and working, you know, the kids can feel comfortable, the students can feel comfortable enough to make that shift, and that's where the commonality between the teaching artist and the classroom teacher is really important, you know.
Absolutely, and really that brings us to you know, to the final point that we want to make, is that when this collaboration is really effective, when all these traits, when all these characteristics are in place, when we're firing on all cylinders, really what we're going to see is that the proof is in the pudding, in that we'll see it in the students, is that and in the staff, and really the entire classroom community. If what we're doing is effective, then students will feel safe, students will feel supported, and they'll feel very confident and they'll be a lot more ready to express themselves in the classroom setting.
And I think if they're willing to express themselves, the students, and they're feeling safe and they're feeling like, oh, we have 2 teachers in here now that are going to teach us something, and you know, I feel really comfortable now because now I can do my English, but I can draw a picture. You know, oh, I can tell a story, but I can move. You know, and that's where the outcomes of the collaboration get really, really rich, and that's when education changes and shifts.
Absolutely. You start to see what happened during the creative project with the teaching artist. You start to see some of those outcomes, some of those modes of expression starting to transition over into other subjects and during other times of the day. And that's when you know that your collaboration has really been successful. We do have another question for the audience, and that is, what are some outcomes you have experienced in a collaboration with a classroom teacher or with a teaching artist?
Great. So again, I'm going to look for anyone who wants to raise their hand via the icon on your screen, or if you want to type in a comment into the chat or question box. Great. Leticia, I see your hand, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute your microphone. And you are good.
Oh, I didn't know my hand was up, but that's okay. I was just thinking about I was just thinking about a collaboration that I had a number of years ago. The teacher had worked very hard with his tender heart. It was a male teacher, with his tender heart to include every student in this particular art residency. I'm a storyteller, and so the students were creating their own stories and telling them. And even though some of these kids were at great risk, and he explained some of their circumstances where they came from difficult situations, they felt safe enough that they were willing to try, because he had created that experience and he had talked to me about it, about some of the kids, about some of the experiences, so that I was aware and could tread not oh, I don't know, carefully kind of sounds a little too much, but at least that I would know some of the challenges that they had. And watching those kids support each other, watching a young boy with autism who communication was such a challenge for him to become the star, and it could never have happened had I not walked in where the teacher had prepared the students to trust each other. And then in collaboration, he opened up his classroom, told me about some of the classroom rituals that they had so that I could do things that and come from the approach that they were accustomed to, but then yet I was able to give them some different things to try, open up some different views and try some new things. The risks that these students took and how they supported particularly this autistic boy. The next year I was able to go back in the next grade level up. They wanted a second experience for these students, so I didn't have the same teacher, but I had the same students. Some of them, or most of them, were the same, that they kept referring back to that experience that they had had in that particular classroom and about that boy. It was very memorable and never would have happened without the teacher and I working together.
That's great. It was Sophia. Was that your name, honey? Sophia?
Leticia?
Oh, Leticia?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. That's great. You know, and that's something that that we've all had probably some you know, a highlight of that in our teaching practice on both sides of the coin. And thank you for sharing that, because, you know, when you have moments like that, build on that. You know, we keep building and building. So then when conflict does come up, we know, you know, it's a little bit easier to digest and communicate. But thank you very much. That was a great story.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So this really brings us down to the wire. We only have perhaps a few more minutes, unless we're able to stick around a little longer to answer any questions anyone may have, or to talk about any concerns or interesting points that people want to bring up. But this pretty much concludes our webinar, unless you guys have any questions for us.
Great. So Chad and Nancy, thank you so much. This brings us to the questions portion of our webinar. So if you haven't already, now is the time to enter a question into the question box or to raise your hand. I'll share while we wait for questions to start coming in that we did have someone share an example from the last prompt. They wrote, a student asked if they could write an answer to a prompt in the classroom as a monologue after one of their first workshops with us. And the classroom teacher commented via email that it was a student who she often believes wasn't listening. Introducing a dramatic writing tool was obviously a strong entry point for that student in expressing their thoughts on the classroom subject.
That's fantastic. Love it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's just one of, I'm sure, many examples of a time when the teaching artist presents the teacher with a new strategy that can be used to reach our students.
Great. Another question. You mentioned earlier that paraprofessionals can be a wealth of information, and I agree. Logistically, how and when do you suggest connecting with paras in order to learn more about individual students? In my experience, they can be hard to get a hold of.
Yeah, this is this is absolutely true. So one thing that we've done in my classroom in the past, you know, obviously paraprofessionals are not oftentimes freed up to meet with the teaching artist and, you know, to sit in on that planning meeting. But what we can do sometimes is when the teaching artist first comes in, before the teaching artist greets the whole class, the teaching artist can come in, you know, 5-10 minutes before the next period starts, and have a quick powwow with the paraprofessionals while the teacher finishes the last parts of their lesson before the period with the teaching artist begins. That's something that we found to be most effective. Because realistically, getting the paraprofessional out of the classroom is it's very difficult, if not impossible.
Great. Chad, this question is directed specifically at you. They write, I'm curious as to what you might suggest teaching artist, or when a teaching artist comes into the classroom and realizes the classroom teacher is not interested in an arts residency. How might the teaching artist work with a teacher that is resistant from day one?
Good question.
That's a very good question. I feel that at that point, you know, hopefully again they're having an opportunity to have those planning meetings. I feel that should really be a requirement of any collaboration, and in those meetings, hopefully the teaching artist is at least getting the opportunity to ask the teacher, well, you know, what are your interests? What are some things that you would like to see your students do? What are some things that you feel have been areas of challenge within your classroom? If a teacher is so opposed to having a teaching artist there, really the question that comes to my mind is why is the teaching artist there in the first place, and how was that arranged on an administrative level, where, you know, if a teacher is so opposed to that, then the administrator really never should have coordinated that in the first place. And I do feel that this is a place where the administrator's job becomes very important, and that the administrator really needs to know their staff well enough know, who is a teacher that will work well with a teaching artist, or who will be at least open to the support that a teaching artist can provide.
Great. We'll take one more question. Mark, I see that you have your hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you whenever you're ready.
Thanks. I'm going to try to be succinct. I'm kind of in a unique situation in that I'm a theater educator that works in a K-5 school setting, and I see all of the students on a weekly basis, including the designation here in the state of Florida where students with special needs are referred to as ESE labeled, and some of them are the two groups I see. One is they're moderate in terms of their disability, and one group is very low, and they come in with their paras and not the teacher. And I hold my mainstream kids to a very high bar in terms of accountability for respect and having kinesthetic discipline and order, and it's very successful. But when these students come in twice a week, many of them are nonverbal and have extreme autism on the spectrum, where just sitting still is a problem, lots of behavior that's really hard to make the class move forward. So I used to let that go, but now I'm kind of drawing a gentle line in the sand. I'm just wondering how I negotiate those kinds of obstacles and not seem like I'm coming in and trying to push my agenda on the paras and the ESE teachers and their way of working with kids and the expectations that they have that are maybe different from the ones I expect from them.
Yeah, that's. I feel like that that could be another webinar, Nancy.
That could be a whole webinar. Chad, do you mind if I just ask?
Oh, sure.
Mark, I wanted to ask you a question. When you're working with your group that is nonverbal, and how do you set up the classroom, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I have a very large open space, carpeted area, and we come and sit on the floor, and those students that have problems with physical self-control, there's usually a para that's sitting there giving them physical cues or stroking or just holding or just hand, kind of like a human weighted vest, so to speak, to keep when they get really agitated. And that's how I have my space. It's open.
If you don't mind, Mark, this is a little bit of a collaboration between me and you right now, the two teaching artists. Do you have access to chairs?
There are a couple, and sometimes the paras will say, it's really good if this student can just sit. So sometimes that, I mean, I'm not so strict that I don't allow that. I mean, if it's going to make the class go forward and have most of the kids engaged, then I can give that up.
You know what, though, you could, if you don't, I'm just going to give you a couple of, you might want to just put it in your toolbox or just try it out. If you just have a circle of chairs, so it's more of a contained area, because sometimes kids in that situation feel safe when it's a little bit more contained in a close place. So like a circle of chairs, so everybody's kind of close, and just doing maybe passing an object, just to get, you know the old pass the object theater game.
Right.
Just passing, just to get everybody, a little bit more focused, or maybe some soft music, just to create a circle. But in chairs, sometimes the chair gives our kids that we're working with a sense of core, a sense of knowing where they are in space.
And I also have a lot of really visually stimulating things in my room, and some students get up and start wandering around and picking up things, and the paras are pretty good about letting them know that that's not appropriate, and I will say, thank you for not touching things that you haven't asked permission to touch. So,
that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's wonderful. Yeah. So maybe, just try maybe a couple of those things, in a circle with chairs, and maybe taking some of the visuals out if you can, and making, I don't know if you can or not, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I know that's a very loaded question, and I have a kind of a really complex dynamic with those students.
Yeah. You know what? It's not a loaded question mark at all. I mean, that's a whole day workshop.
Right.
It really is. It's a very, very important question, and it's about scaffolding your class in a way that meets your students' needs. And from what I'm hearing and just my own experience, that your kids need a place where they could feel that they're centered in space, maybe a little bit more contained, and a little bit taking away some of the distractions so they can focus.
Well, today I took a big step and we role-played the three Billy Goats Gruff, and I actually used my cubes to make a bridge, and I was surprised how successful it went.
Good. Put that in your toolbox, Mark.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Nancy and Chad, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to do this webinar for us. And I'd like to ask our webinar participants to please remain on the webinar for a few moments longer to complete a short evaluation survey that will open when you close your window. Your feedback is always appreciated. Thank you for joining us. For questions or comments, you can contact me by email at jgabriel@kennedy-center.org or by phone at 202-416-8861. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.